Good morning everybody. So, today I am going to talk about gas turbine combustion, and this is now a system level problem. In the previous talk I talked about the measurements which were primarily on component levels, but when you go to systems it is much more complex. So, I would like to try to give a glimpse of the complexity of the problem, and before I do that I will talk a little bit about the lab. I think some of you have visited the lab yesterday. Is the Aero Propulsion Lab, which was established in 2001 and is completely funded by the projects, and we have a lot of sponsors starting from DST, DRDO, then BRC, Pratt & Whitney, both USA and Canada, and ARDB and ADA. And primary research areas that we are focusing on at present in the lab is combustion and atomization, turbomachinery, flow control and fire dynamics, and flow control we use in basically most of the systems. So, therefore, you can say it is the primary focus is flow control, because to me I believe that even atomization is flow control or combustion is flow control, because you want to modify combustion, you change the flow. So, I believe that flow is the driving factor in all of them, that is why you can say it is essentially flow control. So, the ongoing research in the field of gas turbine engines, rocket motors as well as flow control. We do experimental work, so numerical simulation as well as analytical work. Of course, I collaborate with other colleagues in this too. I personally do experiments. So, in combustion we do combustion design and development, fundamental flame dynamics, combustion instability, then ignition and stability limit, emissions, combustion noise as well as numerical simulations. In turbomachinery we do cascade aerodynamics, stall and surge studies, aeroelasticity of turbomachinery, then CFD, CSD, that is computational fluid mechanics dynamics and computational structural dynamics simulations, then turbine blade cooling. Now, as I go along I will show that typically a gas turbine engine has 5 components. There is an intake, then compressor, then combustor, then turbine and then nozzle. So, a gas turbine engine consists of all of them, and we also work in pretty much all the components, starting from intakes, which essentially is a flow device, then nozzles, which essentially accelerates the hot gases coming out of the turbine to produce thrust, plus liquid atomization, which essentially supplies the fuel flow into the engine. So, we have a lot of equipments available in the lab. I think you have seen yesterday, starting from LDV PDPA to LIF, LII, this is laser induced incandescence for soot measurement, then PIV, different emission analyzers, different cameras, starting from thermal camera to high speed camera to image intensifier camera, then different type of atomizers, then heater. We need the heater because typically as I go along I will show that the air coming into the gas turbine combustor is not at atmospheric pressure and temperature, but is at high pressure and temperature, because it will come after the combustor. So, therefore, in order to simulate the conditions prevalent in a gas turbine combustor, we need high pressure, high temperature air, and that is why the online heater to heat it up. And of course, compressor is required almost for all the tests. Then hot wire anemometry and various other things are there, which are listed here. So, we have many test rigs for various studies, starting from multiple combustor rigs. We have a gas turbine combustor test rig, which is high pressure and temperature. I think you have seen that yesterday, as well as atmospheric rig with optical axis. This one, the high pressure rig, does not have optical axis, because it is simulation of a practical gas turbine combustor. So, it is a twin wall structure. So, you cannot have optical axis to see what is going on. That is why we have atmospheric test rig with quartz windows to essentially visualize the flame as well as take measurement using PIV or LIF or LDV inside the combustor rig. Then we have various dumb combustor rigs, then blood body stabilized combustor rig as well as a combustion tunnel. Then for turbomachinery we have multiple cascade tunnels. We have one annular cascade tunnel, 2 linear cascade tunnels. Then we have blow down type subsonic and supersonic jet facility for nozzle characterization. We have blow down type tunnel for intake characterization, as well as we have a spray characterization chamber. So, pretty much all the components of a gas turbine engine we work on, and we can characterize experimentally, as well as we do numerical work in this. So, typically for combustion we use ANSYS, and there is a reason for it. I use commercial codes because, as I mentioned, that these are all sponsored projects, and most of our combustion work is sponsored by Pratt & Whitney, and it is mandated by them that we use ANSYS, because they also use the same software. Similarly, when we do the turbomachinery work, it is sponsored by GTRE. They want us to use CFX. ANSYS CFX, that's the software they are using, so that it can be very seamlessly integrated with their development, and that is why for different problems we use different softwares. Now, these are some pictures of some of the test rigs. This is the high pressure combustor rig. The pressure can go up to 20 bar. The incoming temperature can be up to 350 degrees Celsius. Then the air flow rate up to 0.5 kg per second, that is quite a bit of flow rate. And we measured the pressure differential, this is the combustor. Across the combustor, the temperature at the exit of the combustor, the emissions and chute, and I will talk a little bit of more details about these experiments. So, this was used for application of biofuels for aviation, combustion and emission studies, which was funded by DST and Pratt & Whitney. So, these are some of the measurement of flow rates and emissions at particular location. Now, this is the atmospheric gas turbine combustor rig. This essentially has a, now in order to simulate, when I talk about gas turbine combustor, I will discuss that gas turbine combustor typically has different air streams, all the air is not damped in one plane. So, therefore, in order to simulate that, we have actually 4 different air streams, separate primary, secondary, quenching and atomizing air supply, so that we can independently control all 4 of them. So, we can understand the effect of particular air stream, because I believe in gas turbine combustor the air plays the most important role, it dictates all other parameters. So, therefore, we can control that. Then we have accurate metering and control of both the air as well as fuel. Here it is a liquid combustion, previous one also I showed liquid combustion, because as I said there is a gas turbine combustion typically use aviation turbine fuel, that is JP4. So, we are using the same fuel, it is not that we are simulating with some other fuel. And that makes it more difficult to numerically capture the trends, because typically the chemistry is not available for the fuels that we are using. Sometimes we use some surrogate fuels for the numerical simulation, but they do not represent the actual case. And then we have optical access, as you can see here, these are the quartz windows. So, we are planning to do PIV, LDV and PLIF measurements, and these are tunable. So, we can change the length of the tailpipe, so that we can change the combustion acoustics as well. Current use is active and passive control of combustion hooting or combustion noise. This is the picture of the spray, there is an air blast atomizer that is used. This is an IR image of the combustor in operation, and this is again the as you can see the pressure oscillations without control, with control, you have suppressed. So, I will go in more detail on this, and this combustor was operated at the combustion intensity close to that you will have in practical gas turbine combustor, which is about 25 megawatt per meter cube atmosphere. So, that is, yeah. I will come to that, I will come to, I have more detail of this, this is just I am talking about the experimental process, I have more detail of on this one. Then this is a combustion tunnel, this is essentially to look at various fundamentals of combustion. So, it has full optical access, it is, this one is acoustically decoupled, you can see the decoupler here, so that the acoustic waves do not reflect back, so that the combustion is not affected by the system acoustic. And we have heated air supply. At present we are looking at effect of reacting flow on blade heat transfer. This is a new problem we are working on, where the turbine blade cooling is one of the major areas, and turbine is the most expensive component of gas turbine, and the life limiting factor is the turbine inlet temperature. So, people do use turbine blade cooling to extend the life and as well as the operating range. But what has been seen is that, because heat transfer is a very well established field, and the prediction based on conventional heat transfer calculations do not match with what we are seeing in reality, and that reduces the lifespan of the blades. Now, what we are seeing is that for the heat transfer calculations over turbine blade, you assume the flow to be frozen coming from the combustor. So, reactions are complete, you have a hot flow, and based on that only you are doing the simulations or the calculations. But in reality, what is coming out of the combustor is not a frozen flow, you still have radicals, you still have combustible species present. So, when the cooling air comes in into the, and the temperature is also high, so when the cooling air comes in, it reignites the fuel. So, there may be reactions continuing, and if you are not taking care of this reaction, your calculations, of course, the temperature predictions will be less, your heat transfer predictions will be less. So, that is what we are working on, and we have successfully shown that when we actually inject the air, it was vis-a-vis nitrogen, you actually get a change in temperature, increase in temperature, which shows that, and also the species concentration changes, which shows that the reaction do occur when the blowing air is sent in. So, this is one thing we are working on in the combustion tunnel. Then we have some.
So, what you just said is that the cooling air comes after the burning happens.
Yeah.
Near the turbine blades, again
Cooling air is coming from the turbine blades.
So again the combustion starts
Yes,
after it's already burned from compressor.
but it doesn't burn completely. Okay. I will show you some simulation results, you will see. I have simulation results from the gas turbine combustor and I have measured result for flow coming out of gas turbine combustor. You will see there is a lot of unburnt hydrocarbon, a lot of carbon monoxide present, and the temperature is so high, it's typically 1200, 1300, more than the auto ignition temperature. So the additional air that's coming in can react with that. Okay, so this is one of the linear cascade tunnels, which is for turbomachinery studies. Since it is a combustion, so I will not go into detail of that. So we are doing a lot of turbomachinery flutter investigations in this. This is a annular cascade tunnels, another annular cascade tunnel, but we are looking at the effect of blade leading edge, and we are essentially delaying the stall happening on the compressor blades, because up to 43% improvement in stall margin was achieved in this. Then this is an annular cascade tunnel. This is something that we have developed ourselves. This is the test section, and this is for studying the force response of turbomachinery. You can see that the blades are given controlled motion, and then the response of that is estimated, and then the stability analysis was carried out to show for which conditions it are likely to be unstable. Then this is one of the areas that we work extensively, is on liquid atomization. Different type of atomization we use, and so we measure using the LDV and PDPS. This is the spray chamber, which is designed for 500 psi pressure, 450 degree Celsius temperature. It has 30 centimeter diameter. It has excuse me, complete optical window, 3 optical windows for the PDPA measurement, and pressure and temperature everything is regulated. Now at present we are working on one field here. I will show you this one if the video comes up. Yeah, probably you will not be able to see. This is a jet in cross flow. Typically that's what happens in Airbus atomizers. You can see the jet coming out and air is coming from here, and this is something that we are now working. This project is funded by Pratt & Whitney USA, so and United Technology Center. So we are working with them. What you see is that this is the jet coming out. The jet is undergoing tremendous flapping, and we have actually done some analysis and measurement of the breakup location, and because of the flapping the breakup location changes, and if we do a statistical analysis of that, the location follows a log normal distribution. And typically if you look at spray, that also follows a log normal distribution. So far people do not know why it followed log normal distribution. Now probably it is the interaction of this jet with the airstream which is creating the log normal distribution in the spray size. So we are working on that. So this is an ongoing project, it has been going on for last 4 years and it still continues. So we are going for high pressure, up to 4 bar pressure we have done. Now 4 bar pressure is because is easier for us to do atmospheric pressure, but this problem is also being worked out by IISc. They are doing numerical simulation. Now there is the problem. The density ratio, if you are doing atmospheric, the chamber, atmospheric pressure chamber is about 1 bar and the density is about 1.1 kg per meter cube, whereas liquid has a density of 1000. So the density ratio comes out to be 1000, and with that density ratio numerics cannot capture the boundaries. There is not converging at all. So then, and it is more difficult for us to increase the pressure, but slowly we increase the pressure because they said that we can do up to 200 density ratio. So we took the pressure up to 4 bar, that is atmospheric 5 bar gauge absolute pressure. Yeah.
So when you are talking about breakup and rating cross flow, so by looking at the images it is sometimes not very clear how you define the column breakup point. So what criteria are you?
This is done with image processing. We are tracking the continuity of the, because we are doing high speed imaging, and then we are doing a very high fidelity image processing. So we are tracking the continuity of the jet and see that the point where it is discontinuous. Yes, it is not, it is turning also, so you have to go in this way. Then we are finding out the location where it is becoming discontinuous, and for every image. So and also you have to do a statistical analysis. So it is not only a mean. And we are also developing correlations. We have already developed correlations, and this is for a straight flow. We are actually doing for swirling flow up to 45 degree swirler. So we have developed correlations for the predicting the locations also, physical correlation analytical models, and also we have measured the droplet size. We have measured the press path. We are also, say this one experiment is, as I said, is ongoing, if you look at this one, this is for the straight, but when you go for swirling flow, then it turns. So, we are actually taking images from two angles and doing a tomographic reconstruction to get the path and the breakup location. So, it is a very difficult problem to do. Even when we go to high pressure, within seconds the entire window gets fogged out. So, then we have to have special mechanism for cleaning it. So, we are actually sending heated air to clean the windows. But so again, this is something that I am not going to the details of that. So, we are doing the measurement of velocity, all three components of velocity of the droplet as well as the air field. Now, there is another interesting thing that we saw, that air is coming here on its own, it has certain velocity field. When we put the liquid jet in, air field changes, because the liquid works like a blob body, a cylinder sitting on the path. So, in the vicinity of that the air field changes. So, therefore, what typically will predict that based on a particular air field the breakup will happen, it is not the same. And most of the literature which is available is essentially liquid coming from flat jet, but in reality what you have is annular passage. So, in flat jet essentially it creates a horseshoe vortex, which is much more deterministic, but this in the because of the annular passage the horseshoe vortex is absent. So, therefore, even getting the whatever the correlation available in the literature does not match with the actual conditions. So, that is why we are developing our own correlation, which is based on physics. Anyway, so this is just I wanted to show some of the work that we are doing. So, these are the ongoing research titles: active and passive suppression of footing in gas turbine combustors. So, this I will talk little more in detail later. Then aeroelasticity of turbomachinery blades, then liquid jet breakup in annular swirling flow, then design development and characterization of twin fluid atomizers, then effect of leading edge tubercles in the compressor, then IR suppression, of course, that is essentially flow control and mixing, then identification of flutter precursor, then heat transfer from an equilibrium flow. This is the one that I talked about, the turbomachinery, the turbine blade cooling. So, if you have heat transfer in the equilibrium, so instead of considering it a frozen flow, if you consider equilibrium flow, the entire scenario changes. So, that is what we are experimentally we have shown, and then we are also working on development of non-intrusive temperature and density measurement techniques using Rayleigh thermography. And the idea of doing this is that if we are successfully can do this, we can convert this to a thermal PIV. Essentially, we can take the temperature measurement using a planar laser, and then we can use a pulse laser. The temperature field we can use as the identifier instead of particles. Like in PIV you need to have particles to seed the flow, but in the flame we do not need the particles if we get the temperature field, and we can use the temperature field as the basically identifier. Then we can do the correlation similar to PIV correlation to get how the temperature field is changing from image to image, and from that we can get the velocity field. We have done some preliminary result. I think yesterday those who have visited the lab, there is a poster there which talked about thermal PIV, where we can get all the trains, but that was done without any calibration. This is essentially if we can, because that was just from the image, if we can get the temperature measurement, that is calibrated as well. So, therefore, that is what we are working on, development of a thermal PIV. Now, coming to the today's topic, I was asked to talk about gas turbine engines, and then some of the work we are doing related to gas turbine engines. So, turbines is supposed to be the most efficient machine to extract fluid power from flowing fluid. So, most expensive, if you look at the power generations, apart from solar, if you take out solar, every other power generation system uses some kind of turbine. So, if you look at different power generating using, for example, nuclear uses steam turbine, thermal uses steam turbine, where steam essentially you are using the steam to produce the power, which is the steam is passed through the turbine. Then water turbine or hydel turbines are for power generation, wind turbines for power generation. Similarly is gas turbine. So, in steam turbine you create steam by some other thermal means, and then you use the steam to allow the steam to pass through the turbine to produce power. In gas turbine, instead of steam, you actually energize a flow of gas and then allow that gas to pass through the turbine to produce power. So, therefore, the gas turbines typically are used in aircraft engines and for power generation. Aircraft engine at present, leaving the small aircraft which are still using piston propeller engines, all other aircrafts use some kind of gas turbine engines. So, and also helicopters. So, if you look at turbojet, turbofan, turboprop, turboshaft, these are all gas turbine engines, different variation of gas turbine engines. So, most widely used for gas turbine engines are in aircraft application. Similarly, power generation, again I think out of the total power produced in the world, about 30% comes from gas turbine power plants, and there are big players in the world like Siemens, like GE, like Mitsubishi, who are, they produce big power plants, they make big power plants, and moreover all over the world gas turbines are now being used as power generating unit. Particularly the advantage is they can use natural gas. So, natural gas is coming out to be the fuel for powering these power generating units. So, the aircraft, the gas turbine engines, essentially you have high pressure and high temperature gas, and this gas is generated inside the engine, and then that is passed through the turbine to produce power. In the case of aircraft engine, the energized gas is passed through the turbine, which is used to run the compressor. The rest of the energy remains with the gas, which is then expanded through a nozzle to produce thrust. And but if you are talking about turbo shaft, which is used in helicopter engines, or a turboprop, which is used in smaller aircrafts, there you have another turbine where the gas is passed through to produce shaft power. Instead of producing jet power, you do produce thrust power to produce, for example, for a turbo shaft engine for helicopter, or a turboprop engine which turns the propeller. So, all of them, the heart of the system is essentially what is called a gas generator, which consists of a compressor, a combustor, and a turbine. These three all together produces the hot gases, which is then used for the power generation. So, gas turbines was invented in 1930s by Frank Whittle and patented in 34. First use for aircraft propulsion was in 1942 in Messerschmitt 262 by Germans during Second World War, and this is, if I look at 1942, and at that time all the world powers saw the potential of this technology. So, 42 it was introduced, but it was too late in the war to have any impact. By the time we come to 1950s, Korean War, all the old aircrafts have been removed, and we see all jet aircrafts. So, within 8 to 10 years there is a complete paradigm shift in the aircraft used for warfare, and after that now, apart from the transport aircrafts, all other military aircrafts are some kind of jet engine. And of course, earlier it was turbojet, now we are moving to turbofans because of different requirement, and turboprops are also used extensively for essentially, it's like a Super Hercules is a turboprop engine for essentially cargo planes. So, therefore, currently most of the aircrafts and ships use gas turbine engine, is also extensively used for power generation. There are many manufacturers in the world, and these are big players. We do not have small players in gas turbine industry. So, General Electric, Pratt & Whitney is only aircraft engine, they do not make power generating unit. Snecma or Safran, which is the French company making the engines for Mirage and Eurofighters. The Eurofighter is not, Eurofighter is Rolls-Royce, I think, yeah. Snecma is for making for all the, I think, Airbus and all the Rafale or Dassault Aviation engines. Then Rolls-Royce, Honeywell, Siemens Westinghouse is, and Alstom, they make power generating unit for power plants. Also there is Mitsubishi, and in India we have Kaveri engine being developed by GTRE, and up to 9th version it has developed. Also the GTRE Navy is quite successful. GTRE Aviation is still, there is some more to go, but the problem is not on the propulsion side, it is more on the material and electronic side, the controls and the materials. So, let us look at the principle of operation of a gas turbine engine, how does it work. The first component which sees the airflow is an intake. So, the air is in this schematic, air is coming from this side, is an intake which essentially is just a duct. It slows down the incoming air and removes the distortions or gusts that is present in the incoming air. Why does it slow down? Because the compressor, the next component which will be coming after the intake, compressors cannot handle very high speeds. Now we do have compressors going up to transonic, but not supersonic. So the aircrafts are supposed to fly at supersonic speed, which many military aircrafts do. Then without the intake, the compressor is going to stall or surge very fast. So therefore, intake essentially is the flow conditioning unit in front of the compressor. After that, it goes into the compressor. Compressor dynamically compresses the incoming air and increases the pressure. So typically at the present day we can have pressure ratios going up to 40 to 50. So, atmospheric air is compressed 40 to 50 times, earlier it was less 10-20 pressure ratio. So, up to 40 to 50 times the air is compressed dynamically. Now, you need to say this is flying aircraft, we are talking about an aircraft engine flying. So, you need to have power to be supplied to this compressor to compress the air, and that power is produced by turbine. So, we have a turbine which runs the compressor. So, the power required to run the compressor is produced by the turbine. Now, if that is the case, you need to have additional energy added between the compressor and turbine, so that turbine has sufficient power to run the compressor and still you have additional energy left for thrust production. So, therefore, between the compressor and the turbine there is a combustor, where fuel is added into the air and heat and combustion takes place. So, therefore, now we have energy addition because of the chemical reaction. So, what is coming out of the combustor is high pressure, high temperature gases, and that goes through the turbine. So, turbine and compressor are tuned in such a way that the power produced by the turbine is exactly balancing the power required by the compressor. So, therefore, now the rest of energy which is available, the pressure is still high, temperature is still high, is expanded through a nozzle or a free turbine to generate thrust or produce shaft power. Apart from that, the present day, this is a schematic of a turbo fan, where we have a fan also and bypass. So, the turbine also rotates this fan and part of the air goes through the main engine, part of air goes through the bypass. So, therefore, the overall mass flow that is going through the engine is increased quite a bit. So, a typical civilian aircraft will have a bypass ratio of 1:5. So, only 20% goes through the core and 80% goes through the bypass. So, the amount of air available is huge, amount of flow available is huge, and the thrust produced is proportional to the mass flow rate as well as the exit velocity. So, you are increasing the mass flow rate, you are keeping the exit velocity same, you are increasing the thrust much more. So, that is the idea of a turbofan engine. So, most of the aircraft engines are now turbofan engines, not turbojet. If you remove the fan, it becomes a turbojet engine. So, this is the principle of operation. Now, each component is important because nozzle will produce the thrust, compressor and turbine combination is to produce the high pressure, and combustor is to produce the high temperature. Now, the combustion that takes place then is at high pressure and temperature, okay, because the pressure drop between the compressor and combustor is almost insignificant. So, therefore, typically the combustor has to operate at high pressure and high temperature, and that is one of the challenges for the gas turbine combustors. So, the advantage of a gas turbine engine, first of all, it has a great power to weight ratio compared to reciprocating engines. So, for a given weight it can produce much higher power. It is smaller than the reciprocating counterparts of the same power, which is much more compact. It has much lower emission levels for the same power output compared to reciprocating engines, and can operate over a very wide range of pressure and temperature. Typically, if I look for an aircraft engine, on the ground you are experiencing the atmospheric pressure and temperature, but if it is flying at a cruise altitude of 30,000 feet, the temperature is minus 50 degree, the pressure is also much lower, half of what is there in the ground. So, this entire range you have to cover and the combustion to sustain, because what the compressor is giving is a pressure ratio. So, on the ground if you are say operating at a pressure ratio of 20, on the ground the combustor pressure is 20 bar. At the high altitude it has reduced to half, 10 bar. Now, similarly the temperature, there is a temperature ratio rise is given. So, on the ground the temperature is at 300 Kelvin, at high altitude it has gone down to 250 or less than 200 Kelvin, the temperature is also less. So, this entire dynamic range, similarly the power during takeoff you require much more power, so much higher flow rate. At cruise you have much lower requirement of flow. So, this entire variation in flow rate as well as pressure and temperature has to be handled without any failure, because if it fails people are dead. So, therefore, also in the sometimes it do happen because at high altitude there is a problem of flame out. So, you need to have capability of high altitude relight. So, at 30,000 feet the engine blows off, you have to relight it again, and that is also a very challenging issue, because the ignition conditions, power required, ignition energy required will be much higher at high altitude, because of the fact that the pressure and temperature is much lower coming from the atmosphere. So, and also the density of air has reduced, so therefore mass flow rate also changes. So, you have a very large dynamic range that needs to be covered in the gas turbine combustor. Now, the disadvantages, first of all, is expensive, very, very expensive, because of the high speeds and high operating temperatures. One of the most expensive component of a gas turbine is the turbine, because of the special materials required to withstand high pressure and high temperature, and these things will be all rotating. So, you have lot of gears and lot of bearings and all, because typically it will be rotating at 20 to 30,000 RPM. So, the entire mechanical system makes it very, very expensive. So, designing and manufacturing gas turbine is a tough problem for both engineering and material standpoint. You need special materials, standard materials will not withstand. Now, on the same, another problem is that while you are trying to operate at very severe conditions, at the same time you have to keep the weight low. So, therefore, you cannot have thick materials. So, for example, a gas turbine combustor is made of Inconel, which will be less than 1 mm thick, and that has to withstand a pressure of 20 bar. Okay. So, that is why it is made of special material like Inconel, which withstand high pressure, high temperature. Similarly, when you go to turbine blade, these are made of titanium crystals, pure single crystal titanium blades and titanium alloy blades, because it has to withstand the high pressure and temperature. So, the material also makes it very, very expensive, because these are not standard materials which can be easily used, but these are special alloys. Then another problem with gas turbine engine is it tends to use more fuel when they are idling, because when the engine is idling, engine is typically designed for cruise condition. So, the optimum performance is for the cruise condition, because it is expected to operate most of the time at that condition. But if you are operating at off design condition, the fuel economy is very poor. So, typically idling is not the design condition, so the fuel economy is very poor. So, therefore, they tend to use more fuel when they are idling. And another thing is that unlike a conventional reciprocating engine, where the supply and all the processes are transient or basically unsteady or fluctuating, gas turbines prefer to have steady loads than the fluctuating load, because the turbine is not designed to take a fluctuating load. Therefore, combustor also should be producing a steady condition. There should not be any hot spots, because that is going to burn through the turbine blade. So, you need to have uniform temperature profile. So, these are the specific requirements, that what is coming out of the combustor also should be uniform, so that the turbine is not seeing any distribution of temperature. So, that is called pattern factor, which should be as uniform as possible. So, because of this difficulties, the gas turbines are great for aircrafts, but you cannot have this as a car engine, because first of all the cost is too much, and for the lower speeds gas turbine engines are very, very inefficient. When you go to higher speed, they become much more efficient. So, because the primary propellant is air, which is coming from atmosphere, and the faster it moves through atmosphere, more air will come into the engine. So, if it is moving slowly, the engines are very, very inefficient. So, that is the reason we cannot have gas turbine engines for cars, but for power generation as well as for aircraft application, this is the so far the best possible alternative. So, another advantage of gas turbine is compared to all other power producing devices. For example, I have here some schematics of say CO2 emission, SO2, NOx, other emissions for different power generating units. This is from the coal. You see there is a very high production of CO2. Then oil, gas, this is gas turbine combined cycle, this is gas turbine high pressure, this is bio based, because of course bio is completely derived from so is a carbon neutral, because it is completely derived from atmosphere or from environment, from nature, and this is integrated gasifier combustion cycle. So, you can see that all combustion based things which are using fossil fuels or other non renewable fuels, gas turbine by far is producing the least amount of carbon dioxide, because the combustion is very, very efficient. Typically, yeah.
Because the combustion is efficient, or is it because the fuel itself is like that?
See, the point is that typically, I will come to the next thing, the CO2 is typically given in terms of percentage, right. Now, fuel air ratio of gas turbine engines are less than 0.2% or the vicinity of less than 0.2%. So, it is mostly air. So, the amount of carbon dioxide produced, the amount of fuel that is present is very, very low. Now, every carbon atom in the fuel will produce a carbon dioxide, that you cannot come out of, right. So, even if you are using the same fuel, for example, gas, that has much lower number of carbon atoms, but still the amount of the ratio of fuel and air that he is using is such that on a whole it is producing much more, because like I mentioned, gas turbine, the main propellant is air, fuel is just to increase it, air is getting energized, but other devices fuel is the main propellant and they are almost burning a stoichiometric ratio, but here it is very lean, and that is why gas turbine combustor design is also different from traditional combustor designs. Now, if you look at other propellants like SO2 and all, SO2 you can say is because of the fuel. SO2 is because of the fuel, because the kind of the typically the fuel that are there have very low sulfur content. That is why SO2 is not produced, but again NOx is the temperature based. Now, once again the gas turbine combustor design itself ensures that the NOx is low. Similarly, particulate matter is very low, because the way it is designed and the way the combustion takes place in gas turbine engines. So, what we see is that this has lower emission compared to all conventional methods except nuclear, and regulations require further reduction in emission levels, and that is something this continuing basically the entire industry is working on it to reduce the emission levels further. So, needs for future gas turbine engines: for power generation we are looking at fuel economy, low emissions, and now more and more we are focusing on alternate fuels. So, essentially renewable fuels coming from biosources. So, that is itself a challenge, because every fuel if you are changing, you have to ensure either you go for the complete change of the gas turbine combustor, which is a very lengthy development process, an expensive development process, or can you use the same hardware with different fuels as drop in fuel. So, that is both of the things are being tried, and so far up to 50-50 for aviation applications 50-50 blend has been approved, and I will show here today some of the results where we have worked out up to 100% biofuels for gas turbine engines, and it seems to be easily usable in place of conventional fuels. Military aircraft on the other hand requires high thrust, low weight and low noise, because of more stealth requirement, as well as what has happened earlier. I will talk about the noise. Earlier most of the air force bases were away from the populated areas, but human habitats are increasing in such a manner, now they are going around all the military bases, and the military aircrafts are very noisy. Now people are suing the militaries all over the world for the noise that the aircraft is creating. It is not the military was there before the people moved in, but now of course the civilians always gets priority, so military has to invest a lot of money either on the litigations or to change the technology so that the noise goes down. So, that is one of the major issue. So, essentially the requirement in next few years is half the size of the engine with twice the thrust. So, one thing that they are looking for now is to change the fuel, to have some of the fuels with some additives like boron and other things which are very high energy. So, therefore, you can make more compact engine, produce much higher thrust or higher power by changing the fuel. So, essentially the energy density of the fuel will be much more. So, that is something that they are looking for. Then commercial aircrafts, again low emissions. Now, emission is the main driving factor, emission level is the main driving factor for all the aircraft engines. Then high thrust, low weight, fuel economy as well as low noise. So, this is something that driving the commercial aircraft. We need to double the size of aircraft and double the distance travel with 50% reduction in NOx. These are very challenging requirement and it is difficult to achieve. So, therefore, there is a continuous change in the design of the gas turbine combustors and to basically take care of these requirements. So, now let us come to the gas turbine combustor. Before I go into that, today we are talking about the flammability limits. So, if I plot fuel air ratio versus pressure, this is the flammability limit plot. Okay. You can see that, and this is for methane by the way. So, stoichiometric ratio of fuel air ratio is about 0.06, that is where it is, and both sides of the stoichiometric limit, if we plot the adiabatic flame temperature versus equivalence ratio versus adiabatic flame temperature, there is a lean limit, there is a rich limit. So, that is what is presented here. So, this is the lean limit and this is the rich limit. So, this is also the ignition limit. So, within this domain only the ignition is possible, but conventional all the gas turbine engines operate here fuel air ratio of 0.01 to sorry, this will be 0.2 not 2, 0.01 to 0.02. So that is somewhere here left of this ignition limit. So now the question is physically how do we do it? It is not possible, because from the combustion science it is not possible to burn it. It is within the outside the combustion the ignition limit and combustionability limit. It is possible because the way the gas turbine combustors are designed. So here is the picture of a cutout of a gas turbine combustor. You can see that there are many holes here. All the air is not dumped at the same plane. It is gradually introduced into the combustor, but fuel is dumped almost at the same plane. So these are the fuel injectors, you can see these are the fuel injectors, fuel is coming here, but air is being dumped at various locations. So here is the cutout, this is called primary zone, where fuel comes in and only about 20% of air is introduced here. Now if I look at 20% of air and full fuel, the fuel air ratio in this zone will be about 0.06. So that is almost close to stoichiometry. So stoichiometry, you know, that is very easily combustible, it burns very well. So this is where the main reaction takes place, that is why it is called primary zone. But it is only burning with the 20% air that is supplied. Last 80% then is gradually distributed through the holes that you have shown here. So primary zone, from side also some more air, about 20% more air gets in, and then after that we have dilution zone. So total about 40% air is supplied in the primary zone. This is also called secondary, this 20% is secondary zone, where since you are very close to the stoichiometric limit or slightly, and it is a diffusion flame, so it is always, you may have more unburnt product and CO and all. So this additional air that is added in this zone burns that portion. So now once you cross this limit, you are almost completely burned. So the air is coming in stages, and then the rest of the air is the dilution air, which reduces now the temperature. So the temperature in the primary zone will be the adiabatic flame temperature of the fuel air mixture, which is close to about 2200 to 2300 Celsius Kelvin, but the turbines will not be able to withstand that temperature. So it needs to be reduced to about 12 to 1400 Kelvin. So this dilution air does that, it reduces the temperature. At the same time here, because of the processes that are taking place and you want to be away from all the boundaries, so therefore the distribution is also not uniform, it is not homogeneously distributed all around. So there are some hot zones. So this air, the way it is introduced, will ensure that you have a homogeneous mixture at the exit, so that you get a fairly uniform temperature profile. That is what will go into the turbine. So and on the same time, the air that is passing through this continuously keeps on cooling the combustor. So therefore, and another thing, the pressure on this side and this side is almost same. So you do not need very thick material. What you need thick material is at the exit on the outer wall, but not on the combustor wall. So this design, the combustor wall also remains at relatively lower temperature, because we are continuously cooling, because this is the cold air which is coming in. Of course it is not cold in the same sense, because it is coming from the combustor, so temperature is about 300 to 400 degrees Celsius, but it is cooler than the flame zone, and then it is coming in here. So it maintains lower temperature and pressure on the wall, pressure differential is not there. And now this is the schematic of a gas turbine combustor. So what it does now, let us look at, because the combustion is taking place in stages, first of all whatever unburnt is coming through this zone is further burned by the addition of air. At the same time, if I look at NOx, here the temperature is very high, so you are expected to produce more NOx, but once it comes here, essentially you are doing air staging reduces the NOx. So the NOx producing reactions continue and you reduce the NOx. So therefore all the emission parameters, because of the completeness of combustion, you reduce the carbon monoxide or unburnt hydrocarbons, and the NOx is reduced because of the air staging, and finally what comes out is at lower temperature. At the same time, because of the high amount of air that is putting in, typically the fuel air ratio, as I mentioned, is 0.01 to 0.02. So for every kg of fuel that you are using, you have 100 kg of air. So typically carbon dioxide is measured in terms of percentage. So if you look at the percentage of carbon dioxide produced from the fuel is very small in the overall scheme of things, and that is what reduces typically it will be 4 to 5%, unlike 20%. Yeah.
Sir, in the dilution zone, at the liner, when we try to pull it, we are almost freezing the carbon monoxide CO2 formation. So how do we tackle the freezing reaction?
No, so all the reaction is primarily happening here.
But there will be some let's say some carbon monoxide is at the liner. When you try to pull it,
See, that is what I said, that the design of this zone will ensure that nothing goes into the liner. I will show you some of the simulations, you will see that most of the things are happening here, not close to the liner. So, and the liner also, you can see the cooling air is not coming straight, sometimes it is coming through these lobes here like this. So, that ensures that the distribution is such that nothing goes into the liner. So, what is going into the liner, this air coming from this, you see there is a gap here, that will remove it coming from to the liner, and then there is a cross jet. So, it is, see, the difficulty in combustor design is this, and that is where all the companies keep this thing as a trade secret, that how they design this distribution. I will show you one of the combustor that we used. You can see that it is, this design was not given to us. Pratt & Whitney supplied the combustor fully manufactured, they did not give us the design. Of course, they gave us the geometry because we are doing the numerical simulation, and you will see the complexity in that. So, it is not straightforward, but how they have come about doing that, we do not know. Okay, so now let us look at the complexity of this problem. I am just talking from the flow point of view, not pressure and temperature. We have air flow is coming in the primary zone, in the quenching air, that is in the base plate, you do not want it to be heated up. So, some of the air comes through that, like this is the quenching zone. You can see some of the air is coming about 8%, then so which is keeping the flame away from this base plate. Atomizing air, because typically you will be using air blast atomizers, so some of the air is atomizing air, and then secondary or dilution air. Then we have liquid fuel flow, and typically for the flame stability, swirlers are used, so that you create recirculating zones. Now, let us look at various things what is happening. You have an air flow field which affects the convection, evaporation and mixing, and all the air streams will affect the final air flow field. Then the liquid flow is given in terms of the spray, but the spray also, so atomizing air will dictate the spray characteristic as well as the liquid flow rate, but this is injected in the flow field of primary air, secondary air, primary air and quenching air. So, therefore, there is an interaction between these air streams and the spray again, and that is affecting the convection, evaporation and mixing. So, this two then becomes couple, and because of this coupling the local fuel air ratio is affected. Similarly, swirler affects where the locally fuel air ratio is going to be. So, all of them are talking to each other. So, it is a very complex, multiple air streams coming in, fuel stream coming in, coming through swirlers. Some of them are coming through swirlers, some of, say if you look at this, part of air is coming through swirler, part of air is coming through quenching hose, part of air is coming cross stream, part of air is coming parallel, right. So, it is not that it is a single problem, it is a multiple problems occurring together, and all of them are talking to each other to create a very complex flow domain, and it is almost impossible to decouple everything. We can try to decouple few of them, and it is almost impossible to study each of the physics separately and then come up putting all of them together to give the larger picture, because we do not know how they are going to interact with each other. We just do not know, we do not have that kind of knowledge base to see that if I say develop based on smaller components, how they are going to interact when they come together, and that is what makes this problem more complex. So, the required information that we need for the combustor design is the air flow field, the spray dynamics, which is spray air interaction, droplet evaporation, fuel air mixing, combustion, which includes ignition, flame dynamics, combustion efficiency and intensity, emissions, as well as combustion instability, which can be a deciding factor in particular conditions. So, the inputs that we can give to the developer or a numerical person is P3 T3, which is the pressure and temperature of the air coming after the compressor, which is typically high, both of them are high. Then the air flow rate and fuel air ratio, and of course, the geometry may be given. Output required from the combustor system is P4 T4, that is the pressure and temperature. This P4 is going to be slightly less than P3 because of the pressure drop, because of the heat transfer or the heat addition. It is typically a Rayleigh flow. So, there is going to be some pressure drop. The acceptable pressure drop is about 5%, and that includes the pressure drop because of friction in the combustor as well as pressure drop because of the heat addition. Then the temperature T4, this is the temperature at the exit of the combustor. The primary zone where the reaction takes place is going to have much higher temperature, and then there is a decrease in temperature because of the dilution. So, finally, this is the temperature that will go into the turbine design. So, for the turbine design as well as for the cycle analysis, what is required is these two parameters P4 and T4, and then the pattern factor will dictate again the turbine design. We want to have as uniform temperature field at the exit as possible, and of course, the emissions is nowadays, as I said, is becoming more and more important. So, these are the things that from the combustor has to be provided for the engine developer, because finally everything has to be put together. So, let us see now some of the case studies where we have done some of these estimates. So, I will talk about 3 case studies. One is modeling of a CAN combustor. So, this is not experimental, this is numerical, because I will explain why. Then the same combustor, we have done some combustor studies also. This was a problem with the application of biofuels for aviation. So, the fuel we were changing, and the hardware was supplied to us by Pratt & Whitney, and then after that we will talk about identification and suppression of combustion noise. So, this will be again, all these studies were based on practical combustors. So, first let us talk about the modeling of CAN combustor, effect of fuel and spray. So, this work was done by Mr. Vivek Pandey, who is a PhD student. He has submitted his thesis, and a faculty colleague, Dr. Ashok De. Because this is a numerical work, so it is not my field of expertise. So, essentially I will present the results, but the details I do not know. So, this is the combustor. You can see that this is where the fuel injector is coming in. This is the air entry point. So, air is coming into the fuel injector through this. So, there are 2 openings. One is going just along it, other is going into the fuel injector, and that is working as the air blast, because the atomizer is air blast. So, that is blasting it, and is essentially based on the design. It is not that you can control it. The passages are designed in such a way that they will give a specific distribution. So, and this is the quenching hole. You can see these are the quenching holes. So, there are multiple holes in the base plate, and then there are multiple holes all along the combustor. This is the spark plug. So, all along the combustor you can see there are so many holes through which air comes in. So, at the hole I think there were about 250 holes or so, and this entire thing goes into a casing, and the air is supplied from this side, which gets distributed because of this geometry. You do not have any independent control over the air supply, and then because of this geometry it gets distributed inside the combustor and the combustion takes place. So, you can see there are, and holes are also of different sizes. Apart from that, if you look from inside, there are some loops cut it. So, the air goes like this. So, it will come parallel to the wall. So, that is there in the inside. So, this geometry was given to us. Now, we are supposed to model this with aviation turbine fuel. So, the spray also needs to be modeled. That was a very challenging job. So, here is the initial CFD simulations. Yeah. Yeah.
Here there are so much holes, and how do we recover, when you talk of pressure loss, how do we recover the dynamic pressure loss across these holes?
That is what it is designed for. I will talk about that. See, this is something that are designed by experts who have been working in combustors for years, 30-40 years. So, they have the expertise. Essentially, first they do a 1D analysis for the pressure drop, and from there it is the hole sizes are determined. We have checked that. I do not think I have that data today. So, we have checked that it is within the acceptable limits.
Can we recover the dynamic pressure loss?
Yes. So, there will be some pressure loss, about 4-5%, not more than that.
Is the dynamic, the losses are because of heat release or the dynamic pressure?
It is all combination of all. It is all combination of all. We have done non-reacting relances also. So, that is dynamic pressure loss. So, that is less than 4%, and there is additional pressure loss because of the heat addition. But it was the calculations were checked along with the simple 1D calculations, and matches very well. So, this is the grid. As you can see, it is essentially the making the grid itself. It took us about 6 to 7 months, because each of these holes have independently grilled and meshed. Each of the components pieces are independently meshed, and then they were stitched together. So, this is one of the grids, which is about 5 million cells, Then we have done the grid independent study also with different shells, and then this is circular. So, at the boundaries you have to match properly. So, it was a very difficult thing to do, in which there were the 200 smaller volumes were used for meshing, and then they were stitched together to create the entire combustor. So, this is the kind of schematic of what has been done for this problem. So, this is the combustor. We want to predict the temperature, NOx, soot, different species, pressure and velocity. So, this is the grid, one of the grids. You can see there are multiple meshes used. Finally, this mesh 2 was chosen after the grid independent study. So, these are the different meshes. You can see that this is where the fuel is coming. So, fuel injector is this. So, that is also meshed, and then different passages. You can see here some of the passages are like this, some are straight holes. So, all the holes are, when they are close to the wall, we have finer mesh, and away from it some locations we have more coarse mesh. Then different turbulence models were tried, K epsilon, K omega, SST model, etc. Different fuels were used, heptane as well as C12H23 is a surrogate fuel. Then different meshes were tried, then different spray models were used, Rosen-Lamler parameter, logarithmic, hollow cone, and we also had for this project, our partner was ISC Bangalore, who were studying the atomizer. So, they have provided us the spray data, so we use that data as well. Then different combustion models were used, mixture fracture, laminar flamelet, steady, then EPDF, DES, 1D spray, all kind of models were used. And finally, we got some of the results which I am going to talk about. These results could not be validated, because this detailed measurement is just not possible. What we can take is some of the measurements and we can see some of the patterns, but one thing that was validated, like the question that you asked, was the pressure drop. So, we did experiments, we find out what is the pressure drop. We had some theoretical prediction of pressure drop, as well as in the cold phase case, as well as from the numericals we have compared. So, that something was validated. So, the geometrical details were validated based on that. So, these are the velocity contours at when the reaction is taking place. So, it is flow is going from here to here. You can see that this is the primary zone, here the combustion zone is here, and then the secondary air comes in, which kind of pushes us into a smaller area, and then it goes out. So, these are different turbulence models and inlet conditions effect. So, I do not know which one is what. This is the temperature profiles for different turbulence models. So, combustion near walls, essentially K omega SST was best for the primary zone. Then for the swirl and turbulent kinetic energy generation was better predicted by this model. Combustion towards the center, RKE and SKE fared well, and flow and droplet convect downstream because of the combustion that is taking place. We have, it is bit easier to predict low pressure and temperature conditions, but when we go to high pressure and temperature, it becomes much more difficult. Then the pattern factor was low for high inlet air temperature. So, these are the various comparisons for different swirl numbers, and you see that this model K omega SST gives the best possible scenario. So, after that all the simulations were done with the that model. So, these are the temperature contours at inlet temperature of 36 Kelvin and different turbulence model predictions.
I come from a physical engineering background. Particle engine is one of the very crucial, important thing, both for experiments as well as simulations, with what we call the rate shape. How much fuel do we inject with respect to time? So,
These are gas turbines are continuous combustion. So, the temporal effect does not come into picture. Okay, so, it is continuously combustion taking place.
there have been cases when I have been told that there is a pilot injection and then
That is for the ignition only. After it is ignited, it continuously burns. So, it is not actually I mentioned it does not like to have fluctuating load, unlike a diesel engine where everything is fluctuating. Here if you give fluctuating load, the turbine blade is going to break in 15 minutes. Okay. So, these are the operating conditions that we simulated. So, these are numbered here by according to some Pratt-Whitney internal document. So, 13, 15, 16, 17 and 22, these are the 6 conditions which corresponds to different pressures in the combustor, different absolute pressures, different dynamic pressures, different total pressure, and these are the pressure. Now, this you can see this is the comparison. From the simulation, these are the predicted pressure drop, and from the design values which was provided by Pratt-Whitney, we actually got the same numbers. So, that was the first validation. So, these were the conditions that were simulated, Now these are some of the predictions. As I mentioned that the fuel that we are using in this case was for the experiments will be ATF mixed with biofuels, but the chemistry for that was not available. So we essentially looked at different type of fuels. First we started with methane. The first result that I showed was for methane because the chemistry was well known, and then we went for heptane because a 50 reaction mechanism was available for heptane, and then the C12H23, this was a global single two-step chemistry was used because the reaction mechanism was not available, and these simulations are for different Swirl numbers. As I mentioned that the Swirl number was not known to us a priori. So, we want to find out what is the possible Swirl number, and this is the spray spread, Russell spread 3.5 and fuel Swirl factor 1.2. You can see that the Swirl number does have an effect on the, so these are the temperature, not the temperature, the species concentration, mass fraction. So, you can see that when the spray comes in, it is primarily located on, this is the injection point. So, it is going in this side, but as the Swirl number is increased, it is going more and more closer to the wall. This is something we do not want. We want it to be slightly away. So, therefore, probably this one is a better option. We do not want to go to this high Swirl number. Similarly, this one is very close. So, we will have a pattern where all the heat will be in the central line. So, pattern factor will be very bad. So, this simulation shows that maybe 0.86 or 1 is something that is acceptable. Then this is the temperature profile again for different Swirl numbers. So, you can see that lower Swirl number we have a much higher temperature at the center, but that diffuses much more in these two cases. Still the pattern factor is not very good, but still it is acceptable. The temperature difference is not much. But this one you can see that is going very close to the wall, very high temperature zones. So, that is something essentially the quenching is not working properly. So, that is not acceptable. This two will not be acceptable, this will be acceptable, but here also you see that there is a very high temperature zone here, this is much more diffused. So, maybe this is a better. So, typically Swirl number is about 0.86 to 1 for the practical combustors. So, that is what is shown here because again this was a practical combustor. Then the NOx profile. NOx typically is being produced here because this is a very high temperature zone, but it is almost rich flame. So, therefore, NOx is not produced, but when you come here, as you can see the mass fraction shows that we have a very high rich mass fraction here. So, it is a very rich zone. So, NOx will not be produced there, but here it is not that rich and is within the domain where and the temperature is high. This is the high temperature zone which is almost less than stoichiometric, like towards the linear side. So, more conducive for NOx production. So, NOx you can see is produced primarily in this zone and continues here. Again this one gives the least concentration of NOx. Here we get very high concentration of NOx because of the high temperatures produced. So, once again this is the better condition. Yeah. This is Zeldovich mechanism. Yeah. No, it has thermal NOx as well as prompt NOx. Because the full chemistry was used. But this problem was for a C12H23, so there the full chemistry was not available. Now, this is with the IISc spray data for a particular case. This is the C13N condition. So, there is the lower pressure condition. You can see the temperature profile, the velocity profile, the NOx profile and soot profile. So, you can see that NOx is not very large in this case, neither is soot, is primarily produced here and then it gets used up. Temperature is fairly uniform. Now, here I like to point out one thing. This one, the spray profile is something that we chose. This one is the spray is the actual spray. You can see that with actual spray we get much better predictions, much uniform temperature distribution, velocity distribution, much less emissions. So, this is actually the atomizer designed for this combustor. So, the spray data which is designed for this condition produces a much better result compared to if you, yeah.
Sorry for asking such a stupid question, but can you just draw and once show me how exactly the swirl profile, not for this case, generally how is the swirl generated? That's,
I have another presentation where I will show the swirl.
The reason I ask this was because typically in simulations what happens is when we initiate the swirl profile, at least for reciprocating agencies, generally a simple Bessel function which we forcefully impose on the flow field.
No, this is not imposing anything on flow field. it is physically drawing the swirlers and the flow is coming through that. So, essentially let me just go to the board. Let us say this is my injection plane. Okay. So, here I have this geometry given. So, the flow is coming through this geometry and then how it is developing. I am giving inlet condition only here. This is the combustor. Okay. The flow is coming here, this is what I am giving, and then this entire distribution, I am not touching it at all. The air gets distributed because of the geometry. So, it is coming through this swirler and going into this. So, there is no forcing factor anywhere in this simulation. What we are giving inlet is only here, outlet here. Everything inside is pure simulation. Yeah.
When you are saying that you are using the actual spray in this simulation, it means that you have an actual atomizer characterized, or you
Yes, actual atomizer characterized.
for droplet size and velocity, and that you are
Not the size, not the velocity, the size.
that you are using as a
Yes.
okay.
Yeah. So, the Rosell-Numner parameter and the spread parameter were given. This simulation is done in Fluent, so these are the two parameters that were required.
That was not coming from IRC, they did some solution.
No, IRC did experiments, this is experimental data. So, IRC did the experiment on the same atomizer with the same air conditions and they provided us the information, the data. Now, this is again a high pressure case with that IRC spray. You can see that at high pressure the temperature profile is not very good, however, velocity is quite good. NOx has completely eliminated, but soot is much more, and it is known that typically when we go to high pressure conditions or high load, we produce more soot because of the high rate of heat transfer to the droplets, which strips the H molecules and only carbon remains. So, that is why more soot is formed here, and soot is primarily formed, you can see in the primary zone here. Then these are the NOx and soot predictions for different operating conditions and different spray, this is different spray profile. You can see that typically these are the high pressure, these are the low pressure conditions. So, as the pressure is increased, both NOx and soot are increasing almost linearly, the NOx is increasing almost linearly, soot is higher initially, then it goes down, again it becomes higher in these two conditions. But once again, this is the numerical simulation where we used a different fuel because we do not have the chemistry for the actual fuel, which was supposed to be developed by McGill University, but they were not able to supply it in time when we were doing the simulation. That is why we did with the surrogate fuel and the heptane chemistry which was available. The experiments on the other hand were with actual fuels, but there we could not simulate this operating conditions, high pressure conditions, because I will show what happened during the experiments. So, these two conditions we were able to simulate, these conditions we were not able to simulate experimentally. So, these are the numerical results. Now, let us come to experiments. So, one thing I want to point out here that this essentially numeric shows that when we go to certain conditions, why we did the numerics to show that whether we are in the right direction as far as the combustor design is considered, or whether it should be able to capture the parameters that we are looking at, because this is the can. Practical combustors are no longer can combustors, these are actually annular combustors nowadays. So, this is a can which is a simulator of PT6 engine of Pratt & Whitney. So, the annular combustor is scaled down to a can. Now, let us come to the experimental studies for the same one. Experiments were very difficult to conduct in this case. So, these are the students who helped me in conducting the experiments, and this is the experimental setup. Compressed air came in through a gate valve, through a orifice meter where it is metered, then it went through electric furnace to increase the temperature. So, the flow rate of air was quite high, up to 0.4 kg per second. We wanted to simulate the same conditions which we had in the numerical simulations. So, the pressure was also high, then it goes into the combustion chamber where fuel is put in, and now this is high pressure, high temperature. How do we maintain the high pressure here? So, we have to put a choke at the exit. So, choke was essentially a butterfly valve, but the butterfly valve cannot withstand high temperatures. It can withstand high pressure, but not high temperature. So, we needed to cool the exhaust before it hits the butterfly valve. So, we had a water spray, specially designed injector was used to cool the exhaust before it goes into the butterfly valve, and then this was the entire experimental setup. So, the air flow rate maximum was 0.5 kg per second, maximum delivery pressure 20 bar, the furnace power was 200 kilowatt, furnace temperature was 900 degrees Celsius inside the furnace, but what the air takes will be much lower temperature, and this was the problem that we were not able to precisely maintain the temperature. It varied with the flow rate and operating conditions, and the flow pipe diameter was 4 inches. So, this is the picture of the experimental setup. This is the flow conditioning system where the gate valve and the flow meter are here, then it is coming to this heater, this electric furnace, this is the control panel for the electric furnace, and then the 4-inch pipe which is inside the furnace, and we have electric coils all around. So, the entire space inside the furnace is heated, and then part of it gets passed to the air into it. Now, initial design of this one, we had soaking rings around this tube. So, the initial pipe is going through the tube and we are soaking metallic rings. Now, those rings were made of mild steel, which has a melting point of about 900 degrees Celsius. Actually, one day my student wanted, because this experiment, it used to take hours to soak, it will take 3 to 4 hours to go to the required temperature, and then conduct the experiment within few seconds is all gone. So, my student Vivek Pandey became impatient. He wanted to speed up the process. So, what he did was he set the furnace temperature to about 1200 degrees Celsius, and then later on I was in the lab, he comes running to me that something is happening to the heater. He came after 2 hours. I go down and see that the molten metal is dropping from the heater. So, then when we opened it, we saw that the soaking rings were completely melted and attached to each other, because it is supposed to be melting at 900 degrees Celsius and he had put it at 1200 degrees Celsius. So, that entire portion was unserviceable, it was just completely gone. So, then we had to change it, and the problem was that entire piece was couple of tons, and it was, we were not able to pull it out, because the way it was put in, that you can remove a plate, and then since these were rings which could be taken out, and then the pipe can be taken out, but that was not possible, everything has become one piece. So, this entire thing had to shift back to Bangalore where the manufacturer were. So, then they changed it, they took out the rings. Now, what they did was, they came up with a brilliant idea that what we will do is, we will fill this tube inside with ceramic balls, and the ceramic balls will work as the heat sink. So, the air will pass through the ceramic ball, it gets heated up. So, that is how and they supplied it to us, and then we started to do our experiments. So, later on I will say that the ceramic balls created a bigger problem than what we had earlier. So, these are the experimental setup, the instruments used, orifice meter, Coriolis flow meter for fuel. Now, all these instruments that you are seeing, these are, the test has to be conducted according to ASTM standards. So, even though we had an emission analyzer, that was not suitable for it, because every emission has to be measured in a particular manner. Every flow rate has to be measured in a particular, using a particular type of instrument. So, we had to procure all those instruments. Even the emission analyzer, I do not think you can see in this picture, emission analyzer, you have to take measurement at various points and then average it. So, the entire system has to be designed in such a way that the probe goes in a particular location, it has to be maintained at a lower temperature and pressure. So, we had cooling of water going in, continuously maintaining the probe at a lower temperature and pressure, and then the sampling was taken of the pressure, the emission was taken as well as the temperature was measured. So, this is the picture of the combustor running, is the IR image. You can see this is where the flow is coming from this side, this is where primarily the hot zone is. So, this is where the fuel is injected and the hot zone is here, as the combustor is shown here. Okay. So, primarily it gets hot, the most of the heat is towards the exit. Now, this is a picture of when the experiment is conducted. This one is the fuel flow rate, this one is the air flow rate. You can see for different conditions, you start it, then first we start the air flow, take it to a condition, stabilize it certain condition, then we parallelly we take the fuel in a feedback loop separately, not putting it into the combustor. First we have to set the flow rate. So, in a bypass it was set, and then once we get these numbers, we put it back into the combustor and fire it. As soon as it fires, immediately there is expansion. So, the pressure drop changes. So, the air flow rate will start to change. So, we have to correct the air flow rate to maintain for the required condition, and then simultaneously we have to control the exit valve and the flow rate of cooling water, so that finally we get to the condition. So, you can see this is the entire cycle. That is why it required 6 people to do the experiment. Everybody was controlling, because we did not have an automated setup, because that would have costed a lot of money. So, it was a manual setup. So, 6 people were sitting with different valves and controlling it to get the required conditions. So, finally this is what we get, the stable conditions. So, at different times they had to So, there was one person who was overall coordinator and then different people were sitting with different controllers to control it. So, this is the measurements. Now, different fuels were tried. Yeah. This is the IR image from the combustor outside. This is the heat. No, what you have is just a, let me go here. See, this is the outside wall and this is the inside combustor sitting here. So, when the reaction takes, the combustion takes place, the outside wall also gets heated up. So, it gives a qualitative idea that where the reaction is happening. So, these are the different fuels that are used. So, Jethropa, Jet A1, then Jethropa and different biofuel mix. So, this is BF1 is essentially Jet A is the ATF, and then so it is 80% ATF and 20% EOP SPK, which is camelina based biofuel. Then this is 50-50, this is 80-20, and the red ones are Jethropa based, and this is a mixture of all three. So, different fuels, 7 different fuels were used. So, Jethropa is this biofuel, Jethropa based fuel was developed in our Indian Institute of Petroleum in Dehradun. This is essentially a drop in fuel. So, it has the almost same physical and chemical properties as ATF. This was supplied to Indian Oil Corporation in Faridabad, their research center. They did a physical and chemical analysis and then made the mixtures in proper ratios, and then that's supplied to us. So, we have a fairly extensive list of physical and chemical properties of the fuel. Similarly, camelina was procured from UOP through Pratt & Whitney and it was supplied to Indian Oil, and then that was blended like this. So, this was the fuel that was given to us. Now, why Jethropa or camelina? Because they do not compete with the agricultural land. These are not essentially doesn't so this can grown in very arid areas. So, therefore, it is not competing with the food chain. So, that is why the aviation industry always wanted to be safe side from the society, that we are not encroaching upon the agricultural land. That is why these are the preferred fuels. So, this is something that is extensively used in US, this is being developed in India, and it works pretty well comparable to camelina. One advantage of Jethropa based biofuel is that it also has aromatics. Camelina does not have aromatics. Now, in jet engine, unlike in a IC engine or a diesel engine, you have separate this thing your lubricant, but jet engine does not have any lubricant. So, the aromatics work as the lubricant. Okay. So, therefore, the aromatics is necessary for the combustion part. Well, up to 20% aromatics is necessary in the fuel. No, but the combustion is so good that it will not produce. Okay. So, the aromatics is in Jethropa already has the aromatics. Camelina did not have the aromatics, so it was separately added to meet the requirement for the aviation fuel. Now, these are some of the test results. Test condition 1, which was the operating condition 1, is the low pressure, low temperature, and of course, low pressure means not, so this is the condition, test condition 1, air flow rate, inlet pressure was 3.6 bar, temperature 102, and this is the fuel flow rate, and pressure loss was 1.3%, and this is the condition 2. So, you can see there is a 1 bar increase almost in pressure and quite a few much increase in temperature. Now, these are the results for test condition 1 and 2. This is you can see that as we go to higher fuel flow rate, the temperature increases, the NOx is slightly increasing, but there is reduction in most of the emission parameters, and that is primarily because of the chemistry of the, because the biofuel, first of all, this is the high pressure condition where the combustion is improving, high pressure and high temperature, combustion is improving, and that is why it is giving better performance. So, later on what we did was, but one thing is that since there is a change in the operating condition, it is very difficult to compare. So, we developed something called an equivalent condition, which essentially takes the ATF as the baseline and then compares the variation in properties with respect to ATF. So, these are the equivalent conditions. You can see that most of the parameters when we use biofuel, they have reduced, except for the NOx slightly increasing because we are going to higher temperature, but most other parameters are reducing substantially. So, therefore, now one thing I like to point out here, the test that we are seeing, the FAA has already approved 50-50 blend of biofuel and ATF. So, that is already approved. That is why we are going to higher than that 80-20 and up to 100%. 50-50 was taken as the baseline. So, you are seeing that in both all of them it is not only meeting the emission requirement, it is some improving about the emission requirement. Then this is the test condition 1, this is test condition 2. Test condition 2, the unburnt hydrocarbon was slightly increasing for biofuel 1 and biofuel 4, and that is because of the higher hydrogen content in this two, but all of them still were less than the regulational limits for these conditions. So, therefore, these biofuels are meeting the requirement, and this test was done with the same combustor that is shown for the numerical simulation and with the same injector and everything. So, that was the meeting the emission requirement for the direct. So, this can be used as a drop in fuel. However, the physics is still, we are still looking at the data and trying to find out from the chemistry what is the physics of why this is happening. So, still not analyzed the data completely. There is a lot of data is available. So, we have to look at them very more closely. We could not go to higher pressure and temperature conditions in this, and the reason is given here. So, this is the infrared image you can see of the combustor operating at the test condition 1 and 2. This is the fuel injector and the combustion was taking place. When we went to the higher test case, this is the third condition with the high pressure condition, suddenly we started to see here, the combustion is occurring here. You can see this is the fuel injector is here. So, the combustion was occurring on the upstream side of the fuel injector. Suddenly, when we go to this case, we started to see combustion occurring downstream of the fuel injector. That means, the flame is coming before it, and that is possible only if the flame tube is damaged. Otherwise, how will the flame go back, because it is a content thing. So, the IR image started to show there were hot spots from the exit to middle of the combustor, and this showed something is happening when we went to higher pressure. So, then we opened the combustor. We saw, as I mentioned, that they have put this ceramic balls. This ceramic balls unfortunately cannot withstand very high pressure. So, this was up to 4 bar we have already done, we have gone to 5 bar, that was beyond the limit of this ceramic balls. So, the balls broke, there was a screen, the screen broke, the balls broke, and then the balls came and hit the combustor, it blocked some of the air passages and it was completely destroyed. The combustor was completely destroyed because all the balls came into the combustor. So, the combustion was not occurring the way it is supposed to be, because this plate came out. So, this is, you can see the first flame tube, combustor, these are the ceramic ball pieces blocking it. So, entire flow pattern was changed, there were hot spots created and the hot spot hit the liner, that is something we do not want, and it burned the liner. This burning happened in less than a minute. In less than a minute, Incolan was burned out like this. You can see this is all burned. These are burnt pieces, and there were a lot of soot deposit inside. Okay. So, we thought, okay, this is a foreign object damage, this is something because of the balls this has happened. So, we cleaned it, we replaced the balls, got the new balls, this was more securely put in. So, this is what we did. So, this is the flame tube, as you can see these are the ceramic pieces, it was also bent, the combustor was bent completely. So, we changed this, we more securely placed this screen, so that when the balls break they will not come in. We put another screen over it to even stopping the smaller balls from going in, and then we put a pipe here, so that the gravity will take them down, so that they are not going to go into the combustor. So, we thought, okay, now we are happy, we should be able to do it, but one mistake we did, we did not check the fuel injector at that point. So, we did not check the fuel injector at that point, what happened to fuel injector. So, we started the second experiment. Suddenly, again after a while, we see a massive increase in temperature, and that is something not expected, and soot was starting to build up again. So, again we got scared that what is happening. We tried to do this again, second time it got even worse. Second attempt it got even worse and soot increased further. Now, third attempt it became almost flat, the combustor was gone again. So, you can see now it is getting, this is where the fuel injection port is, upstream is getting heated up, which is not supposed to be, and this is the IR image. So once again the combustor was gone, but this time we have taken enough precautions that even if the balls break, they are not, it's not going to damage the combustor. So what happened? So we went through again a series of say investigation that what is happening. We opened it, we saw massive soot deposit inside the combustor. Now if you look at this soot deposit, this deposit is on one side, and this is where the air comes in and the spray comes in. Deposit on one side. So the spray is supposed to come uniformly all through, but one side is deposited and completely blocked. So therefore the spray is coming all in the other direction. So its available passage area has reduced. All the flows, the same amount of flow we are pushing in, it is coming at a much higher speed from the other direction, and that is hitting the wall. So it is hitting like a welding torch, because that is burning and hitting like the welding torch, and it is completely destroying the wall again. But the question is that why is it happening like this? So we went in, so this you can see the damages adjacent to the, and the damages are happening adjacent to the injector. So second one, this is the second one, this is the first one. So you can see a lot of soot deposit, and this is what is happening. So again this is the first one, but the damage was much more. You can see this is the blockages here, but now we don't have the blockages, still it is burning. So then we went into the fuel injector. When we opened the fuel injector, we see a lot of soot deposited inside the fuel injector. And one more thing I would like to point out here, the operating condition for this one, the temperature was higher than the auto ignition temperature. So even without the spark plug, it ignited on its own, and the atomizer was air blast. So air blast atomizer, it went, because the high pressure and temperature ignited on its own like a diesel injector. Reaction started to happen inside the injector because it is air blast, but that condition is highly fuel rich, because it is only a small fraction of air comes to the injector. So you have high temperature zone, highly fuel rich, what will happen? It will produce soot. So it produced soot inside the injector. Not only that, the stem got heated up completely, and there was an O-ring to prevent the fuel and air from mixing with each other. That O-ring got melted. So the fuel came into the airstream further and produced more soot, and that completely blocked the passage and created this problem. So the second combustor was also burned out, so we couldn't go to the higher pressure experimentally because of these reasons. So after we burned the two combustor, we said let's stop it, because we don't know whether we can handle this, because if we go to high pressure, either the ceramic balls are going to break or we are going to have this type of problem. So we stopped doing that experiment. So you can see the IR images, the first test and the second test. Suddenly the back side of the injector combustor starts to grow. So the IR images show that we have high temperature on the casing wall of the combustor, which leads to failure, and that, as I explained, that why it happened. So this is the end of the application of biofuel in practical combustors. Now let's talk about some other problem, which is combustion noise. As I have mentioned, combustion noise is another major issue, particularly becoming important for most of the practical application. This work is now Mr. Dinesh, who is I think doing this course, is working on this problem. His co-supervisor is Dr. Satish Mariyappan, and one MTech student has already worked on this and developed the combustor, and these are some of the this is my collaborator who has done the numerical study. So this problem was active and passive control of hooting, which is the combustion noise, is funded by Pratt & Whitney. What is hooting? It is a very high decibel audible sound generated by the combustor. Typically when you are starting off, if you are sitting in an aircraft, if you sit on the over the wing, you will hear when the engine is starting, it makes huge amount of noise, and that is the noise is hooting. It is not combustion instability per se. Combustion is unstable, but not to the certain extent that is going to destroy the combustor, but it creates a lot of noise, and that sound level particularly travels outside to the combustor, which is very annoying to the passengers. And also the idea of this problem was to identify the source of hooting, how it is happening, and then provide active and passive control of hooting. So I will talk about this little bit. First let us talk about aircraft noise. So these are some rules and regulations which are imposed by the aviation authorities to limit the combustion noise, These two cases I have mentioned here. The Whidbey Island had a naval base in US, and because of the high noise that were produced by the naval jets, the resident of the island sued Navy, and they got huge amount of, first of all, either in damage or they had to close down. So, US Navy closed down this naval base. Another thing is his family sue over jet noise. This is in UK, and the latest thing is that the British Queen, she got huge amount of money from the aviation, the airports, I think Heathrow or Gatwick, because all the aircrafts were flying over the Buckingham Palace and creating lot of noise. So, she sued the airline, the airports, and she got a lot of money for that. So, because of the because it is highly annoying, and it has essentially there's various health hazards, is annoyance, speech, and another thing is that particularly in aircraft carriers, where the sailors are continuously subjected to this noise. Later on in their age higher, when they get old, they have a lot of physical problems like hearing loss, performance loss, etc. Similarly, the people working in airports, because they are subjected to this noise continuously, it can have long lasting health effect. So, therefore, it is important to reduce the noise. Now, engine noise, if I look at typical diagram in 1960s, this is the jet engine. There is a compression noise, turbine and combustion noise, and lot of jet noise, because they are mostly turbojet engines. But when we come to the modern day, where now we are using turbofan engines, the jet speed is very low. So, therefore, jet noise has reduced, but there is a fan noise and there is a combustion noise is still there. So, turbine and combustion noise is still there. So, this is the total engine noise, this is the jet noise, and this red one is combustion noise. You see, in some frequency ranges actually is more than the jet noise, is the most important component. So, that is what we wanted to focus on, the combustion noise, and this is how the combustion noise is created. We have direct combustion noise and indirect combustion noise. Essentially, it is the mechanism is similar to combustion instability. Only thing is that it has it is much more broader band than the sharp peak that you get in combustion instability. So, I am not going, because I have only 10 minutes to more. So, I will try to skip through fast. So, essentially this also follows the Rayleigh's criteria. I think you are going to talk about combustion instability. So, he will talk about all these things. I will just skip this. So, this is following the Rayleigh's criteria, that when the pressure and heat release oscillations are in phase, it builds up the pressure oscillations, and that is what creates the more oscillations and the noise as well. So, if I look at the spray combustion, there are multiple characteristic times, unlike the gaseous combustion, where we have very well defined combustion instability modes, because our characteristic times are known. But here, for different phases of liquid atomization, you have atomization, this convection and evaporation, mixing, and then chemical reaction. So, in premixed combustion generated noise, only this one is what is important, but these presence are not there. But in liquid combustion, all these are also present. So, therefore, the noise created will be broadband. It is not a single spot, because many other frequencies are also present, and the time elapsed between the injection of fuel and the maximum heat release is the characteristic combustion time, which is the time for all these things taking place together. So, the system is prone to instability when the overall combustion times become equal to the characteristic acoustic time of the combustion chamber. Okay. So, now all these things, now as I have mentioned the complexity of the fluid mechanics problem, this is all coupled. It is almost impossible to find out which one is affecting. So, all of them are happening together. So, this is the combustor that we used. So, this is a practical combustor. As I have mentioned, as the gas turbine, the air is coming in stages. So, we designed a combustor which to simulate the same case. So, this is the primary air, this is where the swiller is, this is the swiller. If somebody asks you how the swiller looks like, so this is the swiller. So, it is essentially guided vents through which the air will come in to create the swirling flow. So, this is the swiller. Through the center of the swiller is the fuel atomizer. This is the air blast type of atomizer. So, air comes in through this. So, spray will come here, and then the swiller, then we have the quenching plate here. This is the quenching plate through which the base, so the base air will come in to prevent the base plate to be getting heated up and taking the flame away from the base plate. And then, so this is the primary zone where these 3 airs are added, but we do not go for the detailed many more holes, we went for only this one, but we needed a secondary air also. So, this is the secondary air zone. So, we created a settling chamber and then 12 injection ports fairly large. So, through which the secondary or dilution air was sent in, and then we had the fuel the spark plug here to initiate it, and this entire thing was instrumented. We had windows to see and everything. This is the fuel injector where the liquid comes in, fuel is coming in from here, then it is injected radially out and air comes in and breaks it. So this is the fuel injector which is coming here, and this is at the holes for the quenching here. So this is the schematic which is as close as possible to the practical gas turbine combustor. So this was developed in our lab, and then we started doing experiments. This is the experimental setup. What it did was, since we have now different air streams, they can be independently controlled and monitored. Similarly, the fuel flow rate can be independently controlled and monitored. Unlike in practical gas turbine, where you don't have independent control over the air streams. Once you send the air, depending on geometry, it will go in, and geometry and the operating condition. But now for different operating condition, we can control how much air we want to send in. So therefore, that gives an understanding of how the interaction is happening. So all the air streams were independently controlled, and the fuel stream was independently controlled, and this is the instrumentation. We had pressure and temperature measurement at different locations. We are taking chemiluminescence images. We are doing CH and OH chemiluminescence. We are measuring we are taking the IR image also of the combustor to see where the temperature is high. We are taking temperature measurement. In future, we plan to do PIV and PLIF measurement as well to look at the physics and chemistry of the process. So this is the combustor, and the schematic is given here. So this is, you can see that the flame, the combustion is taking place, and you can see that it is moving around because of the swirling. So it is not a constant flame. Now I think it will play. Can you hear it? These are different conditions, the combustion, noise, and then with control. This is the combustion taking place, and then when we are controlling it, it is going down. So I will talk about how the control was implemented. So different, these are passive control. Essentially, of course, passive control is not that we have introduced a separate geometry into it. When we say passive control, what we did was we changed the air distribution. So in the practical system, it has to be incorporated. This is the change in geometry that has to be incorporated. Active control, on the other hand, is directly can be incorporated in the same system. So okay, that's some of the results now. Let's look at two conditions. This is the effect of spray. So for two different air fuel ratio, one is at this is the atomizing air fuel ratio, one is at 1.5, other is about 1. So the fuel flow was kept same, and we saw that this case, when the atomizing air fuel ratio was high, the Rayleigh index was 3.2. Rayleigh index is the integral of the pressure and heat release oscillation. So that shows it unstable, and this is the instability pattern, and we get about 140 dB noise. Now why it is happening? And this is for the lower air liquid ratio where the noise was less. So first let us look at the spray pattern here. Where is that? See here, the droplets are much bigger compared to this. The droplets are much smaller. So bigger droplets means they are taking much more time to evaporate and burn. So therefore the characteristic time is more. But this one, because of the finer droplet, is evaporating and burning much faster, mixing is happening much faster. So it has a less characteristic time. So therefore it is coming closer to the characteristic time is coming closer to the characteristic time of the acoustic time, and that is what is creating more noise for this case. So that is one of the findings. So overall observations for this study is that when the overall Rayleigh index was greater than 0, we are getting hooting, which is according to Raleigh's criteria, it is well established. However, what is more important is where we are not getting hooting. We are not getting hooting if there were no secondary air. If you don't give it secondary air, there was no hooting, it was fairly silent. Now what does it show? That there is an interaction between primary and secondary airs. That is one of the findings. Then if we are putting the tailpipe, we thought the tailpipe will work as a tuner, but tailpipe was actually reducing the noise. It was acting like a silencer. And typically when the air liquid ratio was less than 1, essentially we are not having hooting. So essentially what it showed is that when we had finer spray, that was leading to hooting. So when the characteristic time was reducing, we are getting more hooting. Few other things we saw. We monitored the pressure in the primary zone and the secondary zone, and we saw that the pressure in primary and secondary zone were at two different frequencies. Now the question is, which one are we hearing outside? So we had to do an acoustic fields test to see which one we are hearing outside. Secondly, we are getting multiple frequencies in pressure. So once again we have to identify which one is the hooting frequency, and then biggest problem was the heat release rate was different frequency than the pressure. Now that's what got us into a huge problem, because Rayleigh criteria is defined when both of them are at same frequency. Now how are we going to reconcile to this problem that we have different frequency for heat release and pressure? First of all, we have to identify what is this frequency difference is, why heat release rate is a lower frequency, much lower frequency than pressure, and we are getting a beat lag behavior in pressure. So we tried to identify each of them separately. First let us look at the heat release oscillation. This is the FFT of the heat release oscillation, which was getting at about 21 or 22 hertz peak, whereas the pressure peak was at about 300 hertz or 270 hertz, quite high. So where is it coming from? So we went to the literature, we saw there was some paper on flame flickering frequency of rotating Bunsen burner, where the guys have rotated the Bunsen burner and looked at the flame flickering. So we thought that we are doing a swirling spray, so if I just change the reference frame, essentially it is like a rotating Bunsen burner. So we picked up the correlations they have given for that, for the swirler, and then based on those correlations we corrected the heat release rates and estimated the frequency. This was our measured frequency, 21.5 hertz, and we got 21.39, 21.4 hertz, almost exact match. So therefore the heat release frequency is because of the swirling. The swirling that is providing this heat release oscillations, which is at much lower frequency than the frequency of the pressure oscillation. However, the heat release also had the same peak. It is not that it is absent, but the dominant peak was the lower frequency, which is because of the flickering, because of the swirling flow. So that taken care of. Next we went to which frequency is the audible frequency. As I said, there are multiple frequencies present. So we had the pressure for this is the amplitude for the different air liquid ratios. What we did was we put free stream microphones, and we measured the audible noise outside the combustor and compared with the combustor pressure. What we saw is that the primary zone pressure is what we are hearing, not the secondary zone, because that is the same frequency. I think I have, yeah. So it is 5 meter away from the combustor, we got the same frequency appearing. So the microphone also gave us the same frequency as what was measured inside the primary zone. So therefore the primary zone combustor, the pressure was the frequency we are hearing outside. Of course the magnitude of the oscillations were much less compared to what was inside the combustor and what was the acoustic frequency. Another thing that what we did was we measured the secondary zone pressure. We estimated, considering the boundary of primary and secondary zone as a open end and other open end, we estimated the frequency. The primary frequency came out to be the standing wave mode for that. So essentially the higher frequency that we are seeing in the secondary zone is the nothing but the pure acoustic mode. But now the problem is the primary zone, what we are seeing, the frequency that we measured, we were not able to put it, where is it coming from? Without the tailpipe, it is not a Helmholtz oscillator. Primary standing wave mode, if we consider a closed open boundary condition, for this temperature, the frequency came out to be 548 hertz. Our measured frequency was 291. Even if we consider a half subharmonic, that is 273. It's close. So we can say that with the correction of the length correction, it will be same. But is it the subharmonic of the primary standing wave mode? We are not sure. And second thing is that if that is the case, it should happen even without the secondary mode, with secondary air. So that is what showed that since we are not getting hooting because of secondary air, it is probably not the standing wave, primary standing wave mode, or its subharmonic. So we went into more studies. We looked at it's probably because of the interaction of primary and secondary air. Then we changed the swirler. So initial studies were 45 degree swirler. We went to 30 degree swirler. With 30 degree swirler, we get very poor atomization and for different conditions, and the flame was longer, and we were not getting hooting. it was the sound pressure level was much lower. You can see about 128, less than 128 dB inside the combustor, outside was much lower. So when we go to a smaller swirler, flame was longer, we were not getting hooting, also everything keeping same. When we go to a 57 degree swirler, again the same problem, we are getting a very fine flame but no hooting. We are getting some standard frequencies which were a higher amplitude inside the combustor, and we calculated this frequency, it worked like a Riquet tube. If you consider the flame front and the tube location after that, we are matching the same frequency, so it worked like a Riquet tube. So it was not hooting, it was a spot frequency that we were getting. So then the question is that what is happening? The Rayleigh index was less than 1 in this case, less than 0 in this case. So it's working with like a Riquet tube, and when we are changing the air liquid ratio, the flame location was changing and the frequency was shifting according to what would happen with the flame location, pretty much like the Riquet tube. So then once again, but this was not hooting, and on the other hand the wall was getting red hot in this case. So then what we said is that the flame essentially is located very close and it is a flat flame, so there is a lot of heat transfer to the wall. So the damping is higher, much higher compared to the other case. So according to Rayleigh criteria, the damping increases, the noise will go down. So that is what is happening here. So the hooting was happening about 45 degree, then we did about 42 and 48 degree swirler also, in that domain it was hooting, but not for a lower swirl angle where the flame was long, not for a higher swirl angle where the flame was short. So then we looked at the variation in quenching air. When we changed the quenching air, the flame shape changed for the same this thing, your same air liquid ratio as well as the same swirl angle, and we see that as we have high quenching air, the noise was more. As we reduce the quenching air, slowly the noise level reduced, hooting reduced. Now when we are reducing the quenching air, the flame is opening up more, because with high quenching air it will push it like this, now it is opening up more. So what it is showing is that this shape of the flame has something to do with hooting. Now this shape, when it is hooting, the flame is actually, after this the secondary air comes in. So the essentially think about it that the secondary air works like a spring and the flame is pushing it. When you are reducing the quenching air, this relaxation, okay, when you are increasing the quenching air, it is pushing more. So the interaction between the primary and secondary air is increasing when we are increasing the quenching air, and the sound pressure level is increasing. So we got up to 10 dB reduction, everything else keeping same, by just reducing the quenching air. We got 10 dB reduction in sound pressure level. So the observation is that increasing the primary to secondary air ratio reduces the hooting. So when we go to higher combustion efficiency, heating is reduced. We got open loop control by varying quenching air and varying atomizing air, but that won't be considered as an active control because it has to be incorporated in the design, so it will be considered as a passive control. The combination of these two gives the best, and there is a specific flame shape which causes hooting. And what happened is when we are increasing the quenching air or atomizing air, it increased the flame angle and reduced the hooting. So when the flame is opening up, the hooting is going down. So now let us going back to what is happening. Hooting is a high decibel noise generated by combustor, and we get this outside the combustor. Now how do we identify and what is the source of hooting? Looking at the experimental data, what we saw is the source is the primary combustion zone. Hooting is a broadband phenomena and not a single frequency phenomena, and is a combination of multiple frequencies resulting in beating type of phenomena, and the identifier then is the broadband pressure oscillation and beating. So with these two, we devised an experimental condition, and from the experiment that we have conducted, that what we think will give the maximum hooting. So we produced this condition, we changed the operating conditions, we got actually extreme hooting. Atomizing air was taken to 1.82 ALR, hooting was happening for greater than 1, primary was taken to be rich, which was creating hooting, and high quenching air, and we got this spectrum. Now in this case, the hooting was so large, the noise was so large that actually the entire building started to shake, the combustor was shaking. Okay, so it was massive hooting was happening. This is the spectrum of that. You see that it was only about 138 dB, so energy was not much, in the peak frequency, but this spread was much more. So overall if you integrate the effect was much more, but there was a high frequency peak appearing here about 1000 hertz. Now the question is, where is this coming from? So when I do the basically averaging of the data, about 13 point moving average, this went down drastically. So that showed there is a noise, nothing else, but this peak did not go down that much. It was from about 138 to about 135, but this reduced by 20 dB. So therefore now this is the hooting frequency, and there is a harmonic of that as well present. Now then coming to this, then if I summarize what we have seen so far, primary zone combustion is causing the hooting, 45 degrees Wheeler, high quenching air, high atomizing air, high primary fuel air ratio, and presence of secondary air. So what I can conclude from that, when we have the primary combustion is rich, we get hooting. Now this is something that the present day combustors, they are going for rich dome combustors. Rich dome combustors then according to our study is going to create more noise. Then the flame push towards the secondary zone, that is the swirler. When it is going to a secondary zone, it is causing the hooting, and is there a secondary combustion, that also needs to be answered. However, all the tests show that there is a broadband phenomena and there is a beating and frequency about 300 hertz. This frequency first of all we are still not able to identify, we have to see where is it coming from. So we proposed a mechanism that is working like a Helmholtz oscillator. So this is typical Helmholtz oscillator. What we say is that this is the fuel air combustion taking place, secondary air is squeezing the flame front to a smaller area, the throat. So it is working, this portion is the Helmholtz oscillator, this is the throat area and this is the squeezing it. Then the frequency if I estimate based on this expression where A is the area and this is the volume and length, then with this we did a simple calculation, we thought that look, it is reduced by say 50% reduction in diameter. With that we did some calculations for different acoustic modes as well as the bulk mode. So bulk mode is this Helmholtz mode. We see that we are getting the same matching frequencies as we have measured in the experiments. So if we consider this as the primary zone, now if the secondary flow is not there, then this phenomena is not going to happen, then it is not going to hoot, it is not a Helmholtz oscillator then anymore. So that is what we are seeing, that secondary flow is creating this pattern or the flow path, and that is what creating the hooting in the primary zone. Then with this, then I went to Ashok, then he did a numerical simulation with the full spectrum, and this is what he predicted. Secondary air injection is actually reducing it. So initially we estimated the frequency based on just considering half the diameter. Now from his simulation we got the actual number, he estimated the Helmholtz mode frequency for this primary zone, and it came out to be exactly same as, not exactly, about 2-3 hertz different from what we are experimentally measuring. So that shows that the primary zone of the combustor is working like a Helmholtz oscillator, and that is what is creating the noise. So then now we have the explanation that the secondary air stream does not function as a completely sealed valve, but it works like a valve. So when the air comes in, it stops the passage, and then the flow is not able to go out, it builds up the pressure, but it is like a spring. So when the pressure build up is beyond a certain limit, it pushes it out, and then the flow is relaxed. So it goes like a pulse combustor or Helmholtz oscillator, and later on I have not shown this data here, we have done the differential pressure measurement between the primary and secondary, and there we do see that there is a negative pressure sometime, which means the flow is coming from secondary to primary, and when we did the FFT of that signal, the differential signal is exactly as the hooting frequency. So therefore that interface between the primary and secondary is creating this phenomena. Now these are different operating conditions effects, I think I am already taking more time, so I will just come to the control. So essentially what we have seen is that it is a phenomena very similar to pulse combustion. So these are the different methods used for combustion instability control. Now you can go for phase modulation or pulse combustion with a geometry variation that will give the control. So in this case when we have hooting, we actually have similar to pulse combustion without fuel air pulsation, because it is like a bulk mode oscillation, it is a hydrodynamic oscillation. So then if we either change the geometry, which will change this mode, or the fuel pulsation or AL pulsation, we will be able to reduce the noise. Basically we can bring about a frequency or phase shift between the pressure and heat release, and should be able to bring about the change. One more thing I would like to point out, the low frequency heat release oscillation, if I look closely at the pressure pulses or the pressure spectrum, we actually get like this, and this difference is the frequency of heat release. So, we get a basically twin mode. So, this difference is essentially what is creating the beating. So, this heat release oscillations, which is low frequency oscillation, is creating the beating phenomena. So, based on that, then we went for the variation in the pulsation. We introduced pulsation in the atomizing air, we introduced pulsation in the fuel flow rate, and some controls. So, I will just, I am already taking more time. So, these are the acting. So, this is the passive control, we have already shown there is a up to 20 dB reduction we got. Active control, we pulsated the atomizing air, pulsation of fuel, and some gas addition can also help. So, these are some of the experimental result for control. So, 50% 3 hertz, 50% duty, 50% duty cycle, we got lot of reduction. So, 12 dB reduction here in the noise we got. So, essentially we are introducing a separate time step and the phase relationship between the two, and that is taking basically breaking the feedback between the pulsations that are happening. So, this is for fuel flow modulation, again different results are given here, again I am not going to the details of that. So, the substantial reduction in broadband sound pressure level, particularly the low frequency oscillations. There is a marginal increase in high frequency oscillation, but quite a bit, about again 10 to 15, 11 dB reduction in the peak sound pressure level was achieved in this case. Then when we go for LPG injection, slight amount of LPG was introduced, that will change the dynamics completely. What happens in that case is that the LPG will burn at a much faster rate. So, the entire characteristic time will be reduced to much more, but it will taken to a different basically domain altogether, and that will bring a lot of phase difference between the pressure and heat release. So, if you see that without the LPG, the peak to peak oscillation was almost about plus minus 4000, with LPG it has come down to about 1000. So, substantial reduction in the peak sound pressure level. So, it went down to by about 23 dB reduction. So, the idea is that if you go with a pre-vaporizer, a partial pre-vaporizer, a partial premix, which now present days all the combustors are going towards, we will be able to reduce the noise much more, because we are introducing two different time steps or characteristic time scales. So, that shows that we are actually we will be able to reduce the noise produced by the combustor much more. So, the conclusion, the control we can get passive control by changing the Swiller, quenching air, air liquid ratio, primary air, any one of them can be changed to reduce the amount of heating that we have. Active control we can get for all three. Airflow modulation is something that the industry would not like to do, because it is much more difficult to introduce, but fuel modulation is very easily can be done, because we have the fuel flow rate. On top of that, you can very easily introduce some of the oscillations, and it will be effective in reducing the noise. So, almost 30 dB reduction in sound pressure level was achieved from extreme heating condition. So, the massive reduction in sound was achieved, and what we saw is that there is a strong dependence on heat release. The interface of primary and secondary zone is playing the major important role and behaves like a Helmholtz oscillator, particularly the primary zone behaves like a Helmholtz oscillator. This, thank you. I think I have taken 15 minutes extra. Any question? Not yet. It was presented in the GT India conference, so because we had to analyze some more data. It is going on.